Hello, I'm Zach from World of Game Design, and I'm going to teach you Mork Borg in 13 minutes or less. I picked this RPG for my first video because the gods know there's nothing more confusing than a book that thinks it's clever by hiding the table of contents in the back, suddenly and without warning starting character creation on page 18, but waiting to actually talk about how ability scores are calculated until well after character creation on page 26, and then only after a bunch of random tables, rules for combat, and the demands of two-headed basilisks does it finish out said character creation with optional classes on page 46. It's a beautiful mess that has our entire community saying, for the sake of all that remains, please just tell me how to play. The answer is actually pretty simple. Let's get into it. Mork Borg is a pitch-black, apocalyptic fantasy RPG about lost souls and fools seeking redemption, forgiveness, or the last remaining riches in a bleak and dying world. Who are you? The tomb robber with silver glittering beneath cracked fingernails? The mystic who would bend the world's heart away from its inevitable end? Confront power-draining necromancers, skulking skeletal warriors, and backstabbing wickheads. Wander the valley of the unfortunate undead, the catacombs beneath the Bergen crypt, or the bedeviled Sarkash forest. But leave hope behind. The world's cruel fate is sealed, and all your vain, heroic efforts are destined to end in death and dismay. Or are they? They are. This is firmly an OSR, old school Renaissance game, meaning it harkens back to a time of less balance, weaker characters, fewer plots, and lots of random tables. If that sounds cool to you, keep going. If you crinkled your nose at anything I just said, you might as well move on to something else. Mork Borg probably won't be for you. Still here? Okay then. You asked for it. Mork Borg uses a standard set of polyhedrals, and just like D&D, you'll be using a D20 for almost everything. Every player character has 4 abilities. Agility, think dexterity from D&D. Strength, think strength from D&D. Toughness, think constitution. And presence, which is a odd catch-all that's like wisdom, charisma, ranged combat, and magic affinity, all rolled into one. Your ability scores are determined by rolling 3d6 for each one, though there are optional rules for classes that modify this. If you have a 9 to 12 in an ability, your modifier is 0. So if your strength score is 10 and you want to swing your club against a lich, that's a bad idea, you'll roll a single d20 and add nothing. Having a score below 9 is going to come with a negative modifier, and anything above 12 gets you a little bonus. This means that it's going to be very common for starting characters to have several negatives and maybe only a single positive modifier. Anytime you roll an ability test, you'll be going up against a difficulty rating, a target number. If you hit the target number, you're successful. Fail, and you fail. All difficulty ratings default to 12, unless the game master determines otherwise. Couple this with the dismal modifiers, and you're all set for a game full of failure. As a player, you're really going to want to find ways of setting the odds to your favor. With an average roll of an 11 and an average modifier of 0 at base level, you'll be failing slightly more often than you succeed. Clever tactics, hard-won magic items, and party coordination are a near necessity for those characters still desperately clinging to life. I think the only other thing we need to note here is that this is a very player-focused rolling system, meaning the game wants the players to be the ones rolling dice, not the GM. We'll cover that more later. There's 2 ways to make a character in Mork Borg. The first is a classless build. Easy and simple. Start on page 26, then head back to page 16, and then follow it through, rolling on a bunch of tables, until you hit page 24. Then bounce to page 39 and continue to page 43 for a bunch more table rolling. Like I said, easy. We could go more into that way, but I think it's best to build characters with the not-so-optional classes that start on page 46, so that's where I'm going to focus. The classes are full of cool, dark flavor that really helps you get into the mindset that the designers are hoping for. You won't find a paladin, bard, or righteous cleric here, nor will you find wizards, sorcerers, or other powerful mages. Nope. Instead, you'll get things like gutter-born scum, which are really like a rogue, wretched royalty, and the occult herb master, which is kind of like a druid, but with a portable laboratory. You won't find a bunch of new mechanics in any class. Leveling is pseudo-optional and fully left into the guiding hands of the GM. Instead, you'll get some additional ways to modify your starting ability scores just a smidge. A tweak or two to your starting equipment, and a couple random tables to roll on that help you generate a quick origin and give you a neat ability or two that's chock full of flavor. Once you're done there, pop back over to page 26 to roll your ability scores. Then dash to page 18 and, abiding by any new guidance from your classes, roll on each table to determine your starting equipment through page 24. Buy additional extra equipment on page 25, and then finish it out with the personality and history tables that start on page 39. Now, the only thing we haven't talked about yet is powers. You probably know these better as magical spells. Some classes, not all, have an affinity for using these powers, but no matter your level of understanding, you'll first need to find a scroll in order to cast anything. Only a few classes start with a scroll, and typically only one. All character magic in Mork Borg is centered around these scrolls of power. No scroll, no power. If you have scrolls and your class allows you to use them, you'll be able to utter an incantation a number of times per day equal to your present score plus D4. More information on powers can be found on pages 34 and 35. Let's finish out the video with a chat about combat. You should expect a lot of combat in this game, and it is way, way simpler than D&D or probably most any other RPG you've played before. At the base level, it's gridless, so you won't be calculating feet or meters of movement, unless you want to slot this in. To begin a combat, first start with initiative. The GM rolls a d6, and on a 1 to 3, the enemies all go first. And on a 4 to 6, the players get that opportunity. Determine individual initiatives within a group by rolling a d6 plus agility. On your turn, you can take a single action and traverse, quote, a normal-sized room. Once combat begins, players will be rolling for both attacks and defense. All hits are determined by the roll of the player die. If you're playing on Roll20, when a player takes damage, they actually roll that damage themselves as well. Delicious. When a player character wants to hit a creature, they'll roll either a strength attack for melee or a presence test for ranged attacks or casting a power. They'll roll agility tests for defense. Unless the creature stat block says otherwise, the player is shooting for a 12 or better, with rules for critical successes and failures. When a game master attacks a PC with a creature, again the PC will make an agility test for weapon attacks, and most often a presence test for powers used against them, again shooting for a 12, unless the creature stat block says otherwise. Additionally, armor comes into play here. Armor gives you a die to roll whenever you take damage that reduces that damage. The die could be a D2 all the way to a D6. That said, armor also raises the base difficulty of your agility tests, so it's going to be harder for you to avoid attacks themselves, but you'll be able to reduce all the damage you take. Depending on the type of armor you're wearing, you could be raising that DR12 standard up to a DR14. Two more things, and I'm going to let you go. Hit points. Hit points work very similar to D&D, in that they are based off your toughness score and start out around 5 or 6. When you take a hit that reduces you to 0 or fewer hit points, you are broken, and you'll roll on the broken table, which has results from falling unconscious to dying. If you manage not to roll death, you'll still be in the broken state, and any further damage kills you outright. Simple as that. You'll recover hit points at a rate of D4 per catch your breath and take a drink, and D6 per restful sleep. Finally, we come to that last element of combat, and it is creature morale. Now, player characters don't have morale, nor often morals, but enemies sometimes do. Every enemy stat block has a morale score ranging from 1 to infinity, most often from around 7 to 11. The GM will roll a morale test for enemy creatures when their numbers are reduced to less than half, or if you're fighting against a single creature, if its total hit point count goes below 1/3. The GM will roll 2d6, and if the number is below the morale score of that creature, the creature will flee or surrender. So your typical combat will be fast and brutal, with low amounts of hit points to start with, and a morale system on the back end. It'll be a rarity that you encounter those types of fights that take up an entire session. That's it, folks. Of course, there are things we didn't cover, but you should have a pretty good idea of what you're getting yourself into. It's really, really simple. Like, I was chatting with another Mork Borg creator at a recent convention, and he made the statement that this game is 100% style and absolutely no substance. The book itself is what's intimidating, and I hope you now feel like you have the groundwork for making a game happen. It's really fun, it's a great world to play in, and I've had an absolute blast running it for my players. If you like this video, consider subscribing to our channel. We have a lot of great content and different playlists, all centered around getting you into more RPGs and making those games better. We also have our very own Mork Borg adventure, 7 Aboard the Shackle, written by yours truly. It centers around a prison ship adrift upon the endless sea, commandeered by 7 escaped prisoners and hell-bent on drowning what remains of the world in profanity. Think of it as a prison crawl through a randomly generated, massive galleon version of Arkham Asylum. It's crazy. If you watch this video in January or February of 2022, the project is live on Kickstarter. If you're watching from the far future, you can likely find it on our website, wogd.com. Finally, we have a podcast. It's called Geeks Cant, and it features myself and a couple of my Yahoo Game Master friends chatting about topics that came up at our tables, Kickstarters, RPG news, and interviewing creators by the dozens. Go give it a listen if podcasts are your thing. It's also recorded live right here on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook every single week. I don't know what system we're going to tackle next, but you can expect a video like this about a different system every few weeks. Until then, we'll see you next time.